June 7, 1942, 1:14 a.m., Liverpool, England. Rain slams sideways against the blackout curtains of a small, dimly lit office overlooking the Mersey River. The wind howls like distant artillery. Inside, a lone figure hunches over a cluttered draft, ink-stained fingers, wired glass, shoulders tight, exhaustion. Hugh Ioris Hughes, 45 years old, civilian engineer, and a man about to sketch the most insane idea the war will ever see. A floating harbor. Not a pier, not a platform. A harbor, massive enough to unload an army. You can almost hear the scratch of his pencil fighting the storm outside. To anyone else, the shapes on his paper would look like madness. Steel roadways anchored to the seafloor. Hollow concrete caissons the size of apartment blocks. Bridge spans stretching like metal vertebrae across a violent sea. He mutters to himself, half delirious from days without sleep. If the beaches won't let us build a port, then we build the port on the water. Outside, waves hammer the coastline, a reminder of the problem every Allied commander fears. Normandy has no usable deep-water port. No port means no tanks. No tanks means no invasion. No invasion means Hitler's fortress Europe stands unchallenged. But tonight, inside this tiny room, Hughes draws a way to cheat fate. He knows what the generals think of him. A dreamer, an eccentric architect, a man who once spent a year designing floating breakwaters for Welsh fishing towns. No one, not the Royal Engineers, not the War Office, not the Combined Chiefs, believes you can build a port that floats in the middle of the English Channel. And even if you could, they say, the Germans would blow it to pieces in minutes. Yet Hughes keeps drawing. Lightning flashes, illuminating the sketches, modular steel roadways called whale bridges, floating pontoons known as beetles, and monstrous concrete blocks that would become the Phoenix caissons. Giants meant to be sunk into place to create an artificial harbor wall. He whispers a single sentence to the empty room. It has to work. There's no other way. His pencil stops. His eyes narrow. He stares at the blueprint as if it's alive. But he also knows another truth. If he brings this idea upstairs, they'll laugh him right out of the building. And they will soon. But in this moment, this storm, this loneliness, he doesn't think about the ridicule. He thinks about the men who will die on the beaches if the Allies land without a port. Suddenly a knock rattles his office door. Hughes jolts upright. The footsteps outside are heavy, military. The door creaks open, revealing a silhouette in a wet trench coat, fog curling around their boots. The man steps inside, water dripping onto the floorboards. Hugh, he says quietly, you're going to want to sit down. London needs every engineer by morning. Something's changing. Hughes swallows hard. He senses it too. The invasion planning is tightening. The noose around Fortress Europe is forming. The man points at the scattered sketches. What are you working on? Hughes hesitates. Because once he says it out loud, once the idea leaves his mouth, it can't be taken back. He turns the blueprint slowly, letting the dim lamplight hit the impossible drawing. The visitor leans in, confused at first, then stunned. A beat of silence, and then another, and another. Finally, he whispers, "Good God, Hugh. You expect this thing to float?" Hughes looks him dead in the eyes. "No," he answers. "I expect it to win the war." The man straightens, rainwater dripping from his coat. "Hugh, you realize they'll tear you apart for this?" Hughes nods. "But what if they don't?" he replies softly. The visitor studies him for a long moment, then folds up the damp collar of his coat. Get some sleep," he says. "Tomorrow we show this to command." But neither of them knows what's coming. The laughter, the insults, the dismissal so humiliating it will nearly end Hughes' career. And yet also the moment that will change history. Because one skeptical officer, one unexpected voice, will see something no one else does. And everything will shift. June 9th, 1942. Hallway smells of wet wool and cigarette smoke. Officers in pressed uniforms stride past with clipped urgency. Folders under arms, boots echoing on polished stone. Hughes walks among them like an intruder, a civilian in a world carved from brass and command. He carries a single tube, his blueprint, his storm-born idea. Inside the briefing room, a dozen senior officers sit around a polished oak table. Maps of the French coast are pinned to every wall. The debate is heated. Impatience thick in the air. Lieutenant General Harold Alexander glances up. The engineer. Not unkind, but not welcoming either. Hughes' escort clears his throat. "Sir, this is Hugh Ioris Hughes. He has a proposal regarding the port problem." A dry chuckle rises from one of the colonels. "The port problem? Unless he's brought Cherbourg in his coat pocket, I doubt he solved it." Muted laughter. Hughes feels heat climb up his neck. But he steps forward anyway. He uncaps the tube, slides out the blueprint, unrolls it across the table. Silence. At first, polite confusion, then disbelief, then amusement. One commander leans back, eyebrows raised. You want to build a harbor that floats? Hughes tries to answer, but another voice cuts in. And tow it across the channel like a child pulling toys in a bathtub. More laughter. Someone mutters, good Lord. Next, he'll be suggesting floating cities. Another adds, we need serious proposals, not fantasies. Hughes steadies himself. This isn't fantasy, he says quietly. It's engineering, modular components, prefabricated, towed, anchored, assembled in days. A complete port on the water. One officer taps the drawing dismissively with his knuckle. These concrete blocks would weigh thousands of tons. They'd crack under their own weight before leaving harbor. Another scoffs. And these bridge structures, whale, is it? Floating on beetles? What are we, Noah's Ark? The room breaks into derisive chuckles again. Hughes feels something twist in his chest. Anger, humiliation, a sense of slipping off a cliff. He's spent his life climbing, but he forces himself to continue. We cannot storm Normandy without a deep-water port. Cherbourg will be destroyed by the time we take it. We need reality, Mr. Hughes. An admiral interrupts sharply. This is not a Welsh marina project. This is war. Hughes's escort shoots him a pained look. I try. The blueprint lies on the table like a dead animal. A senior figure, Major General Charles Wickham, stands. That will be all, Mr. Hughes. Hughes gathers his papers with trembling fingers. He nods stiffly, turns to leave. But before he can step out, a voice from the corner, calm and clipped. Hold. Every head turns. A man steps forward, an officer unnoticed until now, his uniform neat but unassuming. His eyes scan the blueprint with an intensity that hushes the room. Lord Louis Mountbatten, Chief of Combined Operations. He taps a finger on the drawing. Gentlemen, look again. A tense stillness settles. Mountbatten continues. Ask yourselves this. If we cannot take a deep water port on day one, and we cannot, what alternative is there? Mr. Hughes may very well be proposing the only feasible solution. The officers shift uneasily. Wickham frowns. Are you suggesting we pursue this contraption? Mountbatten's jaw sets. I'm suggesting we cannot afford arrogance. If this can be built, we must build it. If it can work, it may win the invasion. A long beat. Hughes barely breathes. Mountbatten turns to him directly. Mr. Hughes, refine your design. Strengthen the breakwaters. Prepare scale models. I want tests within weeks. Hughes nods, stunned. The room is silent now, not mocking, but calculating. Mountbatten looks at the officers, eyes cold. And remember, victory often begins with a ridiculous idea. The blueprints that moments ago inspired laughter now glow under the lamp like a prophecy. But as Hughes steps out of the room, heart pounding, he has no idea what awaits him next. The brutal testing, the failures, the political battles, and the storm that will almost destroy everything. September 3rd, 1942, 6:11 a.m., Garliston Bay, Scotland. Fog drapes over the gray water like a shroud. The tide is low, the air cold enough to sting the lungs. Out on the beach, a cluster of officers huddle in the greatcoats, while engineers hammer, bolt, and weld the strange skeleton of Hughes' idea into being. This is the first real test, a prototype, a dream built from steel, timber, and ridicule. Hughes stands knee-deep in seawater, trousers soaked, pointing as crews lower a segment of the whale bridge onto floating beetle pontoons. Every squeal of metal feels like a heartbeat. Behind him, Mountbatten watches silently, arms folded, expression unreadable. A colonel mutters loud enough for everyone to hear. It'll sink before breakfast, another snorts, or drift to Ireland. Hughes ignores them, but the words stay with him. They always do. Engineers secure the final bolts as the sun claws over the horizon. The structure looks improbable. A narrow steel roadway riding on a chain of floating boxes, like a giant spine stretched across the waves. A signal officer lifts a hand. Ready, sir? Mountbatten nods. The test begins. At first, nothing happens. The bridge simply floats, bobbing like driftwood. But then the tide shifts. The wind picks up. Waves roll in, small but enough to shake any weak design apart. The whale flexes, bends, arches with a strange, almost graceful motion. Hughes holds his breath. The officers lean forward. The waves grow taller. The pontoons slam upward. Steel groans, and still the bridge holds. Mountbatten steps closer, eyes narrowing in concentration. A wave crashes over the deck. The structure dips, then rises again, smooth, controlled, as if following a rhythm only it can understand. The colonel who predicted Disaster frowns. That's unexpected, another murmurs. The cursed thing is staying up. Hughes feels something in his chest crack open. Hope. But the sea has more to say. Mountbatten signals. Bring in the tug. Increase the strain. A small tugboat approaches. Tow cables attached to the far end of the whale bridge. The engine's reverend spray flies. The structure is pulled taut, tested like a bowstring. The bridge flexes dangerously. Metal screams. Bolts shudder. One wrong angle, and it will tear itself apart. Hughes steps back instinctively as waves smash into the pontoons. Every instinct tells him this is the breaking point. A massive swell skirls and crashes onto the structure. A collective gasp fills the air. The bridge disappears under the white foam. Second stretch. No one speaks. The water drains away. The bridge rises again. Slow, steady, resilient. Someone whispers, almost afraid. It survived. Another voice. Impossible. Mountbatten finally speaks, calm but firm. Gentlemen, this is only the beginning, but not everything survives. At the far end, one pontoon lists awkwardly, dragging its corner downward. Engineers race toward it, boots splashing. A bolt has sheared off. The joint is failing. Hughes' heart plummets. If that section collapses, the entire test will be dismissed. Another absurd idea drowned by reality. He charges forward, shouting over the wind. Get lines on it! Brace the joint! Mountbatten watches him sprint into the water, coat flapping behind him. There's something in his eyes, not amusement now, but respect. The engineers lash ropes, tighten clamps, reinforce the point of failure. Hughes kneels on the wet steel, hands numb, tightening a bolt with everything he has. The joint holds, barely, but it holds. The test ends. The officers file away, murmuring among themselves, some impressed, some annoyed, all thoughtfully shaken. Mountbatten stays behind. He walks to Hughes, who's sitting on the edge of the pontoon, soaked and exhausted. You were right, Mountbatten says quietly. This can work. Hughes exhales a long, trembling breath. Mountbatten's voice hardens. But Garliston is nothing compared to what the channel will do to you. Waves twice this high, winds 3 times as strong, and the Germans won't be watching politely from shore. Hughes nods, knowing exactly what he has signed up for. Mountbatten steps closer. From here on out, everyone will try to break your invention, and I mean everyone. If it survives that, we take it to war. He turns to leave, boots crunching on the wet gravel. But before he disappears into the fog, he adds softly, prepare yourself, Hugh. Your floating harbor is about to face an enemy more brutal than the Wehrmacht. Hughes frowns. Mountbatten looks back over his shoulder. Bureaucrats. A cold wind cuts across the bay. Hughes realizes the tests today were nothing compared to what comes next. Politics, rivalry, sabotage disguised as evaluation. And somewhere inside that storm of opposition lies a decision that will shape D-Day itself. January 14th, 1943, 9:20 a.m. London, HQ of Combined Operations. The room feels colder than the weather outside, not physically, politically. Dozens of officers, engineers, and naval planners crowd around a long table covered with scale models, miniature Phoenix caissons, tiny whale bridges, and little floating beetles bobbing in a shallow water tank. The models look like toys, but the arguments? The arguments are war. A Royal Navy admiral slams his palm against the table. These breakwaters will capsize in a real storm. A single gale will scatter them across the channel like corks. A British Army supply commander fires back. And how would you propose we land 5,000 tons of supplies a day without a port? Rowboats, magic carpets. An American logistics officer, Colonel James Yelverton, leans forward, arms crossed. The U.S. Navy says the idea is impossible. The Pacific taught us that improvising ports leads to chaos. We need hard infrastructure, not floating circus acts. Hughes stands silently in the corner, feeling like he's watching a fist fight over his own heartbeat. Mountbatten clears his throat. Gentlemen, this is engineering, not superstition. But the Admiral is relentless. I will not commit Royal Navy resources to a contraption that will self-destruct before it unloads a single Sherman tank. Hughes steps forward finally, voice steady but tight. With respect, sir, the Phoenix caissons are reinforced concrete. Their walls are thicker than destroyer hulls. They're designed to be towed and sunk as stabilizing barriers. A naval intelligence officer cuts him off sharply. And if the Luftwaffe spots them, if U-boats attack, we'll be towing floating grave markers. Murmurs ripple around the table. Mountbatten's jaw tightens. He looks at Hughes. Tell them about the stress tests. Hughes nods, opens a folder, and lays out photographs. Engineers standing beside cracked models, ladders propped against half-crushed prototypes, proof of brutal testing. He gestures to the images. These are the failures. We redesigned every weakness. The new versions survived storms that shattered earlier models. Every flaw we found made the next version stronger. The U.S. colonel snatches one of the photos. Look at this. Half of it collapsed. Hughes answers calmly. That's why the next one didn't. The room quiets for a moment. Not convinced, but listening. Then the most dreaded voice speaks. Sir Frederick Morgan, Cossack's chief planner for the invasion itself. His tone is surgical. Mr. Hughes, Britain cannot afford a gamble. We are preparing the largest amphibious assault in human history. If these harbors fail, the invasion fails. Hughes meets his gaze. If we don't build them, the invasion fails anyway. Silence. Morgan folds his arms, studying the models. Your concept requires thousands of workers, hundreds of ships, unimaginable quantities of steel and concrete. Can you justify that cost? Hughes takes a slow breath. Only if you want to land an army instead of a memorial. A few officers shift uncomfortably. Mountbatten suppresses a smirk. Morgan presses on. Let's assume the harbors work. The Germans still hold Cherbourg, Le Havre, every major port from Brittany to Belgium. It could take weeks to capture any of them. Hughes nods. And by then, sir, our men on the beach will be starving for supplies. Mountbatten steps forward, voice iron solid. This war will not be won by playing safe. It will be won by outthinking the enemy, by giving our boys what they need before the Germans realize what's happening. Morgan sighs and looks at the assembled officers. Let's put it to a vote. Hughes feels his stomach twist. One by one, hands rise, some reluctantly, some defiantly. Nay, nay, and nay. Each one lands like a hammer. Then a single eye. Mountbatten. Another officer raises his hand, hesitant but firm. Then another, and another. The votes shift. Momentum changes like a tide. Finally, Morgan raises his own hand. Aye. The room exhales. Mountbatten nods once, decisive. Mr. Hughes, begin full-scale construction. We take this to Normandy. Hughes' knees nearly buckle in relief. But Morgan isn't done. He leans in, his voice low, almost ominous. Pray your harbor works, Mr. Hughes, because if it doesn't, tens of thousands of men will die because of you. Hughes swallows hard. The reality hits him like a strike of artillery. The idea that was laughed at in June will now shape the fate of Europe. But as he leaves the room, he has no idea that his greatest challenge isn't the Germans, or the sea, or the skeptics. It's a storm that will come out of nowhere and try to tear his miracle apart. 10:32 a.m. London, War Office, Whitehall. The hallway smells of wet wool and cigarette smoke. Officers in pressed uniforms stride past with clipped
Name.